a portrait. There it is.
All right.
It's so nice.
We're on.
Are we on? Okay. All right then. No swearing?
No.
Hello, viewers at home today. This is like Mr. Rogers' episode.
It's a beautiful day in the neighborhood.
Oh my God. So you wanted to talk about the cult of the personality. Now, if as a result of your discussing all this with me, you want to strangle me, you better probably do it off camera. Now, I don't think it applies so much to you because you and I have had this dialogue in various ways and all of it preparatory. But I would go so far as to propose a strong hypothesis that as many as 90% of the people in societies are authoritarian, personality driven. I could use various examples and we can discuss it at length. We also probably need to understand the meaning of the authoritarian personality. How it's always got to have a leader and followers if possible. How if it's just a submissive authoritarian, an ass kisser to somebody like Hitler, there will be a chance to betray him if possible because every little Saddam sitting around the table with Saddam Hussein, all those little guys who look just like Saddam Hussein, dressed like a mustache, same kind of build, all the rest, they would love to tear him down off that pedestal, deep in their hearts, even though they don't feel it, even though they may have even sexual excretions as a result of being in company with a guy like that, because they're so daddy-oriented, so power-oriented. That's the basis of the authoritarian personality. Thus, it's always going to be narcissistic. You will always find it if you look closely, and it will always be paranoid. Not every paranoid is an authoritarian personality. Not every narcissist is an authoritarian personality. But every authoritarian personality is also a narcissist and a paranoid. That's my dogma. And I bet there's a great deal to back that up. So the cult of the personality comes out of the fact that people are basically slavish. In my own life, I had a guy do stonework around my home more than 30 years ago. He was discovered by your dad who did stonework for him. And he was a cheat and a drunkard and he stole money from us and didn't do the work. And he also told me one day that Hitler was a good leader. He was in the Hitler Youth. And then another guy who used to drive me to rehab when I had one of my hip replacements. Back when they used to send a wagon for you and I'd get a free ride back as well. He was a guy from Russia, a very nice guy, intelligent man, and he told me that Stalin was a good leader and they needed another Stalin in Russia, even though he killed 45 million of his people. Hitler was a piker compared to Stalin, and from what Jordan Peterson says about Mao Zedong, Stalin is a piker compared to him. I know that it's well documented that he loved to hang around the torture chambers to watch people tortured. He was a real sadomasochist, that very bad being, very evil being. And, he was at the head of a very democratic society called communism. There will never be a solution to any system so long as people are evil, because evil people will rise to the top all the time. It will be evil people who will be drawn to those positions.
Right, I've heard that a lot of sociopaths make it like extremely far, right?
Oh, absolutely.
Up the chain, because they
not
can just use people.
Psychopaths.
Psychopaths.
Sociopaths are without conscience too, but they're taught. They're like the submissives in a sense. They are opportunistic, whereas psychopath will actually create his conditions for victimizing people. And I have certainly known more than one.
Like they deserve it, or
there's a sense that they're always. It doesn't matter what you say. You don't appeal to any sense of ethics or morality in them, because none of that means anything. The only God they have is the self, And there's, another example. I wanted to go back to our discussion
I'm sorry.
of the authoritarian personality being so prevalent.
Mm.
Here's something. I taught criminology for a number of years, and the only interesting part, really interesting, is when you get into various things like the etiology of criminality. What's the real cause for crime? What's the fundamental cause? And I was the only person to come up with an answer, but I'm not even sure that it can be tested, and therefore it's not even worthy of the word hypothesis. It's just a fact. It's an existential fact. And it's identity, and it's how you justify the fundamental alienation of the singular identity, ego, as we call it, because people are always coming out of the self-interest. Even when they hold the door for somebody else. Even when they give money to charity. Even when they pet a dog that they love without condition. It's the self's doing it. It's going through the self. It's pouring through the self. And therefore there is, not that you have a real alternative in being good to that which you love, because you find you can't be bad to what you love. You try, you know what I mean? It would take death. But still, you are making a fundamental existential decision from moment to moment to moment. How many times do I stroke the head of the dog? When do I stop? You know what I mean? So, anyway, I want to go back to the original point. Here's something from criminology, which I taught. Why the death penalty in this country? It's still invoked in this country. It's not used very much lately because there's so much protest against it. But why does it still exist here where it's been outlawed throughout all of Europe, all the industrialized countries? And I looked and I looked and I looked. I did the research outside of the textbook and all that, a little research, and I found the right thing. And I found all kinds of wonderful explanations and things like that. But what it comes down to is, in Europe, the difference between Europe and America is the leadership. In America, the leadership never pushed to ban it because they were still pandering to the people. In Europe, they took control and people followed them, and now they don't have nearly the gun problems we do because there's such a Wild West attitude of America. It's really a Wild West country. It still loves the Westerns. It still loves that whole thing. So it's a matter of the authoritarian personality. It's a matter, ultimately it comes down to the cult of the personality, because authoritarian personalities have a very strong tendency towards two other factors that I recognize. Totalitarianism and a leader who is like the Führer, mein Führer. They can dedicate all their energy and their morality and everything and dedicate it to the great father. Unfortunately, that's what it is. And it's obviously the result of fixation, but then you say, how so many people are fixated. Look, when Milgram did his study, shocking people, okay, we know about that? The famous Milgram study, he found 67% of the people would continue to shock the victim in the other room, even beyond his screams. After 120 volts, he's silent. Ask the question, and if he doesn't answer the question within a certain time frame, you shock him with the next voltage and the next, up to 450 volts. And 67% of the people, good people off the college campus, one guy was a businessman who had graduated Yale, and he wanted to go back and be involved in his wonderful alma mater, so he volunteered for this study, and he had a breakdown as a result of finding that he would shock this silent guy who would scream, "Stop shocking me, stop electrocuting me," and then he had gone silent, screaming, goes silent, and he continued to shock him because the guy over there to his left was calm and authoritative and obviously a professor from Yale, and therefore he knows what he's doing, and I therefore will concede all my intelligence. And he's a Yale graduate. See, an education doesn't necessarily educate you about yourself.
Right.
The work has to be done on yourself, and you
Of course.
get a chance to do it through. See, here's a guy. He found the shadow, right?
Mm.
What Peterson would talk about, what Jung would talk about, I would talk about. Found the shadow. People's shadow is always there for the taking. I'm one of those people who just evoke the shadow in people.
Well, so just to simplify the finding, you're saying that a person basically would come to the realization, if they could wake up in that moment of shocking someone nearly to death or to death, that they just don't give a shit. Right?
I
like
wouldn't.
they're dissociative to the.
I mean, I suppose you can look at it in different ways. I wasn't thinking of it like that. No, I'm talking about relinquishing autonomy, escape from freedom. There's a book, by the way, if people want to read Escape from Freedom, an old book by Erich Fromm, a Renaissance thinker. He was a Marxist. He was an existentialist. He was a Freudian analyst. He's a very brilliant guy, and he wrote some excellent, excellent books. I possess those copies of them. They were part of my education from many, many, many years ago, and I would just read all those guys, read 10 or 12 of Jung's books, and just swim in that ocean full of all kinds of mythological functions inside your brain, all kinds of stuff going on here. The simple-minded enough people think that what they perceive is the reality. No, no, no. Neurophysiologists, Roger told me this, would tell you that 80-85% of what you see is created. So we're, and McKenna and people like that will discuss this in their own wild ways. But basically there's a lot here. And an artist, I'm looking at Sarah's art, and an artist is just letting some of that pour through. And you pay for it too, I think. Because as an artist you have to be a real artist. You have to basically say there's only one thing really important for me to do. Right?
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah.
It also, in different ways, I think my incredible sensitivity and intuition have been really negative too, and they've caused my anxiety, which has in other ways been really, really difficult. But I think the pros probably far outweigh the cons in the end, because anyone's sort of allowed to.
What happened?
Nothing.
Did it?
No, we're good. Sorry.
Yeah, I mean, anyone has the ability to work on themselves, and so for me, it's been far more rewarding to deal with anxiety and depression and things like that, and still be able to be incredibly sensitive and intuitive. And I think I see things. I don't know, John and I have talked about this. I think I'm very aware of a lot of stuff that people aren't aware of.
Absolutely.
On a minute-to-minute basis.
Yeah.
Hyper aware.
I see that in you, and I'm not trying to butter you up.
No.
I would also tell you that if you were in a debate, let's say, where you want to win a point with someone who is astute and therefore reasonable, your intelligence would be your weakness, because you'll recognize the facts and the truth, and you'll acknowledge them. And but there's something you can do, if I can teach you this. If I get into a debate with a person, there are two things that you should see if I do it right. First of all, there has to be something of an audience who can appreciate reason. And I don't depend on that other person to be that audience. Sometimes I'd have 35 kids in a classroom and I would do that. And other times I've done it in front of even one person, as long as I have an audience. And secondly, the next rule is something I don't follow, but which automatically comes out since I've done philosophy earnestly. And that is, I will acknowledge anything that I recognize as, like the truth. If a person's saying this or that that's true, I will go along, and I will go along, and I will not debate. I will not, and I'm not going to play that role that I've seen other people play, just to be perverse. But in so doing that, I can ask questions, And since my mind goes to the bottom of the ocean, I will ask fundamental questions. And eventually, if the person's full of horse cocky, then he'll contradict himself. And so, since you're already that kind of a person who recognizes reason, use it as a weapon rather than a weakness. Basically, you're only interested in the truth when you do philosophy. It's not the cult of the personality.
Meaning you're not going to yield to what bias, what
Your own bias. I have an agenda. I have a point of view that's right. I've seen what's wrong with the other side, therefore, actually, I never had that. I mean, when I started to realize the world was full of crap, in all the various ways, all the hypocritical ways that you get through media and all that, when the value system is so unbalanced, then I didn't pretend that I was above it. If you do real existential philosophy, psychology, it's like basically existentialism is the best psychology you'll find. Even people who are against it, and back at Boston College knew that. They were not existentialists in the sense that they're subscribing to any existential point of view, but they all say it's the best psychology by far, because it forms the hub of a great wheel, and all the other systems come right down to it. It's always about the individual, and you go as deeply as you can with it, like Sartre, who went right to the nothingness of the human consciousness, le néant. So, if you do that, if you engage in that kind of enterprise of where you're investigating and you're just looking for the truth, you're looking for something that you can put your feet on, you can ground, you can believe, you can say, this is fundamentally right. If you can find that, then ask questions, because that's what real philosophy is. It's questioning. I'm getting off the track.
No. I mean, the origin of existentialism, tracing it back, who started that?
Well, you've always found it. Existential themes are found in St. Thomas Aquinas back in the Middle Ages.
Yeah.
But the people who become, the emblems of existentialism would start with guys like Dostoevsky, the great novelist, the unbelievable novelist. I read his stuff. I was astonished how beautifully he wrote and how in-depth. Great psychological novelist. Taught a great deal about existentialism. And without having even studied it, I was learning about him. And he would touch you, at least he did me, touch you way deep inside with understanding of things. And then you get other people like Kierkegaard, the religious thinker. He was such a deeply saddened, depressed personality. He made Hamlet look like a happy guy. He was dead by the time he was 42. He looked like he was 85 years old, probably suffering from various physical deficiencies unknown by then. But his writings were torturous, and yet they were preludes to Freudianism. They were, don't get me wrong, he wasn't talking about sex, but he was doing psychoanalytic investigation of the human heart in religious terms, in terms of Christianity, very in-depth. And then you get the others, and you get Nietzsche, and then you get Heidegger, whom you couldn't read. And then of course you get others like Kaufman, and then you get Sartre, who to me extremely difficult to read in his own way, in the major works. But he would go to the heart of it. He would talk about, he's a Cartesian basically, but he talks about consciousness as a nothingness. So he goes to the heart, he tries to get that close, where sometimes the other guys don't know how to get around it. They're going around and around, but they're not addressing it academically. He addressed it academically. Like Camus did it, he did one formal work that I read, but he did it through his stories. And you'd say, well, this is just an ordinary story. Where's the existentialism in it? Every bit of it. a lot of it because it just comes out of your gut. Existentialism is interesting. There's a lesson in here that's extremely subtle. You're free in the sense that you're responsible, but you're not really free because you're being driven by forces beyond your control. So you got to take responsibility anyway. And it's people, and I've said to people in a group that I belong to, I said responsibility and guilt are not the same thing. And immediately one young woman attacked me. And then I said, okay, here's an example. You're on your roof, you're fixing something, you slip and you're sliding and you're going to fall off your roof. You're the only one who can save you by grabbing something. Who's responsible? You responsible? Yeah. Are you guilty? You slipped. It's snowing. You know what I mean? People are so gross in their, see, philosophy, I'm sorry, philosophy is also known, there's a Latin term for splitting hairs and then splitting those hairs and splitting those hairs. Most people don't have the capacity to do that. They don't have the tolerance to do that, to keep looking, to be cutting and cutting. But philosophy should be, if it's a real investigation, be looking for the foundation of things. So people propose things. That's the ontology. Here's reality, and pure ideas in a realm beyond life, this life. Plato, something like that. Anything, all kinds of different high-mindedness or low-mindedness, like Marxism, which says that basically material existence creates systems, and that's it. Just comes out. There's no God, and there's no spirit, and there's no soul, there's no afterlife, there's nothing. There's just this, and therefore we will create a utopia in this, except all they do is slaughter each other and send each other to gulags where you die in 40 below zero weather. So Pol Pot, who killed 3 million out of 7 million Cambodians, took them into the forest out of the cities to make a communist utopia, and he tortured most of those people to death. The Killing Fields, a great piece of art, a movie, was about that. I mean, that goes on all the time in the world. People's inhumanity is unmeasured. And a lot of it just comes out of the cult of the personality. If I can diverge back into that subject, those monsters, those demons that followed Pol Pot and did those terrible things, he didn't do it to them directly, he did it indirectly through his minions. But there you are, the minions. Right. And they have a need to believe in some personality. And again, now, these are easy examples and easy to pluck our tongues at. But then you can find it close to home. I knew a woman, in fact, you met her a long time ago, an extremely beautiful and seductive, intelligent woman. But totalitarian, everybody's going to be doing what she does. So Jesus was nothing more than a social worker. No transcendental cosmic consciousness, as Ken Wilber would say, as Alan Watts would say, as D.T. Suzuki would say, as all these other, no. He was just a social worker helping to improve the lot of ordinary people. Just didn't matter what you knew of him. He's what I want him to be, and that's what everybody should be. We're all social workers. We all have this. And she also was an idolator. And she had heroes. And I told you that when it was disclosed that Woody Allen was having sex with his stepdaughter, the one he eventually married, his Chinese adopted stepdaughter, then it cracked something in her because she had idealized him. And there we are, back into the cult of the personality again. And that's what, I'm open to all kinds of questions and challenges because I'm not claiming anything. I mean, I look at the human condition as, the human condition is really amazing. I've been listening to Terence McKenna and reading people like that. And if those people are correct, we are so far away from the universal light. We are so, saturated with all kinds of ignorance and if you're a Manichaean, evil intentions, because all of it comes out of ego.
So, what is the problem with idealization?
It's called idolatry. Fromm would probably talk about how to idolize someone is to project one's own powers onto that person and to see them apart from oneself, because it's a rejection of self. I mean, that's a thumbnail. He would go through it in great length and be very convincing, I think. He said it was convincing, teaching me. I read a lot of his books. Really worthwhile. These, this is part of the movement, came out of the 60s, when people started to look at something a higher state of consciousness. Where people are not necessarily looking at, LSD consciousness, but some people just meditating and trying to follow the teaching of Krishnamurti, who basically said just pay attention to everything. The Moody Blues saying make the journey out and in. I always refer to that because they knew what they were singing about. Make the journey out and in. There's some good music back then. The kids woke up, many kids woke up. Of course, the drugs had a lot to do with it.
Right.
And some of them paid for us. Many of them died. They killed themselves. Janis Joplin, Jimi Hendrix. But it was a time of change. It was a radicalization of consciousness, and questioning authority became a way of life. Kids were burning draft cards. Young ladies were burning bras. A delight for many of the guys that would go to the concerts with them, where they would idealize themselves into believing that they were better than their parents because they were sedated. Woodstock was like that. Everybody was great. It worked, even though 500,000 people must have created, hygiene problems. But they were all sedated. They smoked so much weed. Can you only imagine, right? And some were tripping. I saw photographs of a truck and a kid on the back of the truck with a bunch of his buddies, and they're rolling through the ground, and the kid's, he's got a sign that says acid, $5. And they were idealizing themselves.
Well, and that scenario is still happening today. You go to any of the music festivals, and it's the same.
Is it good?
I mean, yeah, like you park your car, you put your tent up behind your car, and then they create these like pathways. It's like a neighborhood of cars and tents, and there's the neighborhood where they're selling the whatever you need, and honestly, everybody is.
Is it good? Is it a good, peaceful thing?
Yeah, I've never had issues with anybody
well, that's
at those.
Nice
it's this
evolved.
Escape. That's what people love. It's this escape. You can dress totally wacky and wild, and no one cares.
Yeah, it's nice. It's a nice thing. There's something called the Rainbow Festival, I think, that goes on every summer. Gabriel used to go to those. People don't know Gabriel, but he would go to them, and that's where he got his name changed. Right? Some angel crawled into his bedroll one night and she told him that his name was Gabriel, and he believes that she was an angel. The romance of the psychedelic experience, you keep doing psychedelics and reality changes. Better or worse, I don't know. I can't really.
Yeah.
Right.
I mean, he's a kind of a harmless guy, but I think you get lost too. I think we have to spend a lot of time finding our way back. We're not. Anyway, that's another issue.
So back to idolatry.
Oh, okay. My last idol was Mickey Mantle.
Right.
But he really did hit the home runs, and I didn't.
And it matters.
It did, because I had nothing else in my life.
Right.
The Yankees. All Yankee haters hearing this will turn this off. Could have been the Red Sox, but it was back during the time, as Ed Iannicelli, Dr. Ed, I went to school with, points out that the Yankees had Yogi Berra, Phil Rizzuto, Joe DiMaggio. Before that, Tony Lazzeri. There was another Italian on the ball club. And so Italian fathers would gravitate towards the Yankees. That's where I heard the Yankees. My father didn't know anything about baseball ever. But Yankees became the first name, and therefore I was going to play for the Yankees. And then at 8 years old, I'm a Yankee fan.
Right.
1947, and then they would win and win and win and win and win year after year. 15 times out of 18, they were champions of the league. And so I thought it was like a birthright. This is where I was successful because I had no life. Obviously, still don't, doing philosophy. You wind up, if you have no ability to do anything, you can do existential philosophy. Because existential philosophy is really basic psychology. It's just a deep investigation of everything you can say, and it can turn into all kinds of art forms, so that you find existentialism in plays and in novels, and you find existential themes in every piece of art that you even look at. When you talk about something visceral, such as what the Sahara produces, that's existential. You know, you go into a place where you can maybe buy a new car, and you know that you should buy a practical car, but then the guy points you in the direction of the big snazzy car, and you know you shouldn't buy it, but you buy it anyway. Now, it's not as bad as the guy in Dostoevsky's Possessed, who's the prince, and he's just perfect. And he's a good man, helps people. He's not the main character, but he's there all the time, very powerful, very important. And then one day he says to himself, I did not do that. Of course not. I wouldn't. That's absurd. I wouldn't do that. And then it's dropped. You don't know what he's talking about. And then in the next chapter you find he's hanging. He hangs himself. There's nothing to live for. Basically, you have to be really empty to get to that place. And he was a perfect existential man. He was empty. He had everything, and he realized he had nothing. Well, I don't need to analyze. But you come across existential situations like that in Dostoevsky. Like well, the Notes from the Underground speak for themselves. Obviously, that's pure existentialism, where he rejects the crystal palace for a gut level existence where you're not controlled in every way by science and mechanical laws. He said, I would rather suffer than live under those conditions of being content and controlled completely. But then Crime and Punishment, where his character, Raskolnikov, realizes how free he really is, that the constraints are all, according to him, are all socially constructed, including constraints against murder. And so to prove his point, he wantonly murders an old woman. And then there's
and several others by accident.
Does he? I'd even forgotten.
Yeah. I think there was someone else who was accidentally, remember, his plan doesn't quite go as planned, and I think he ends up having to kill at least one other person.
I've forgotten that.
Yeah.
So, the book. To your right.
Yeah.
It's right there.
I've read 3/4 of it. I never got to actually finish it, which is
you don't
upsetting.
know how it
I
ends?
need to know, which is, of
I was
course,
just going to spoil it.
do it. It's fine. I'll reread it, and I'd love to know.
He comes to a conversion. He's put against the wall, as Dostoevsky was, a number of times. They put them against the wall, okay, and they aim, and then they take them back in.
Just to have that moment.
Yeah, have that moment. Here you go. Here's your moment. That's quite a torture, but it's also a great teacher. Anyway, at some point, I don't want to spoil it completely. These things should be read by people anyway. I don't need to explain that. But he comes to a point where he understands something. And, what's missing from all that? If you live in a divided self, if you're in a mind-body split so bad that you don't feel pain yourself and realize that other beings feel pain, then you're cut off not only from others, but you're cut off from yourself. As Fromm would say, alienated from others, from nature, from God, but it all starts with self. You're alienated from yourself. And so you're going to, like, you can talk about a mind-body dualism.
Mhm.
You find that throughout everything. When I started studying the body consciousness guys, like Alexander Lowen, people like that, the betrayal of the body, you find examples of people whose bodies show the dissociation.
Mhm.
And I actually went out with somebody who was perfectly like that, and I realized it. My God, and the conclusion of the relationship was as predictable coming out of the observation of the formation of that person. It's amazing. I'm sorry to speak of it like this. You could do psychoanalysis on me forever, and you'd still be hammering away with a chisel. But everybody's got problems, and you can actually see it sometimes, the way that it forms in the body.
Mhm.
The body will form. I mean, I know that my own psychological problems manifest as certain body parts being painful.
Mhm.
And
Absolutely.
When I got Rolfed, very interesting, the first Rolfing session I had, during which time I'm asking the same question to myself silently, that Sam Keen, editor and psychologist from Psychology Today, asked himself when he first had his first session of Rolfing. Same question: why the hell did I get myself into this? It's inescapable pain. So, and here's the story about the first Rolfing session. He goes through the whole body, but eventually he was down at my ankles. And I remember him telling me, don't close your eyes, because people tend to run movies when they close their eyes. I mean, the whole body's been assaulted now for like an hour and a half, where the deep muscle massage is not a way to describe it. That's a euphemism. I'm not joking, because he uses knuckles, he uses elbows, he uses knees.
Right.
And he will break through all 7 layers of the fascia. So people who bruise had better be ready to be bruised. And then, of course, your brain is flooded with endorphins after that. So he got down to my ankles, and here's just a true story. I'm admitting this on national television with millions watching.
Mm-hmm. Yep. All 7 listeners.
I hope 7. And I started to get a flash of a beach. Right. And you know the story, but it's I don't know if the Sahara has heard it.
No, I don't think so.
And so I didn't think any more of it, but I kept getting a flash of that beach while I was working on my ankles. And then the next day I was doing yoga, because I used to do about 2 hours and 15 to 20, 25 minutes of yoga every day, every morning. And I love the inverted postures, headstand, shoulder stand, and some others, because it oxygenates the brain. It helped me write my doctoral dissertation. I used to keep a tape recorder nearby, so that when I would come out of an asana, a posture, I'd do some thinking on for my dissertation, the clearest thinking I would do. And it was good. So I came down out of the headstand after, 22-minute headstand. Really getting the blood running in my brain. And I do the same with a shoulder stand. And I remembered, while I was doing it, I remembered why I remembered the beach. Because that's where my older brother Frank, when we were kids, and we used to go to this little place called Rocco's Beach down in East Greenwich, where my grandmother and all her old Italian lady friends would scoop up quahogs from underneath the mud out there. I'd be in the water with my older brother Frank, and on several different occasions he'd grab me by the ankles and hold me upside down in the water. And the last time he did it, I was sucking water, so I was drowning. I nearly drowned. I suffered a very scary time. You could call it a trauma. And that was buried in my ankles, in the sensation of my ankles, and when I got off there. Everything can become an existential investigation. We get off the track from the cult of the personality, but the cult of the personality is just one more manifestation of the divided self.